Hey guys, so that is from the BBC. Vincent van Gogh Painted with Words. Excellent documentary. Although I don't think it's cast very well. It's got Benedict Cumberbatch cast as Vincent van Gogh. I think he's too good looking an actor. Besides that, I don't know, he's quite a big guy and he's not really a ginger. So I'm not sure if it really works, but it's a really good documentary, and the documentary also starts off in a really good way, basically saying that we have the wrong impression of him. We've got the wrong impression of the mad artist, or that is the myth of Van Gogh is eclipsed. Sorry, the man that he is has been eclipsed by this idea of him as the mad artist, and his letters bring out the real person. And I think that's not news to you guys, but I think it's important just to think about it that way. Is that there's an impression of Van Gogh, and yet there are 902 letters that um, challenge that impression, and that's really what we're doing here. In the same way with the Nicola Bully case, there's a impression of what's going on in that case, right? And the only way to um, address that is to find out as much as one can about her, who she really was. Is it murder or suicide? In this case, it's the same thing. In Vincent van Gogh's story, you need to get to know him, and there's so much material that we can use to get to know him. So I want to start off. By the way, hello Peaches, hello everybody. I've just woken up, so if I'm a little woozy, that's the reason. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning. Um, we're going to be looking at these two these two paintings, both autumn. Um, And can you see there's quite a lot more color in these paintings than in the ones we've sort of seen so far? Remember, we were seeing various shades of excrement, and we were seeing um, various shades of brown and slime. And you can see over here there are some flourishes of color. This is obviously autumn in Nuenen, autumn in the Netherlands, and a little bit of color here. The image behind me has got even more color. Let's bring that one up. It is Lane with poplars near Nuenen. And for Van Gogh, this is pretty colorful. This is definitely pretty colorful. What is quite interesting here is how he has the foreground in light, kind of in sunlight, so as though the sun is shining on these leaves. Let's do it full screen. And the town in the background is in shadow. Quite interesting, right? Let's make it a bit bigger. So the foreground appears to be in sunlight. A couple of people walking around, and I guess this guy's, um, I guess he's sweeping up the leaves. I'm not quite sure what that is. I don't think that's a leaf blower. And then in the background, that's all in shadow. And he's actually about to um, leave Nuenen for good. He's about to leave this part of his life behind him. Do you notice the sunshine on this side of the stem, right? A little bit of sunshine on that side, a little bit of sunshine on that side, a little bit of light on this side of the stem. Look at those green lines, right? Quite interesting. Uh, I would actually say this is one of his most beautiful paintings to date. I don't know what you guys think. Let's have a look at your comments. Dover says, I'm sure he's tilling the fields. No, I don't think that's tilling the fields. That's kind of the road over there. That's a road. Sharon says, I woke out of a deep sleep and Nick is live. Cool. Welcome, Sharon, in Toronto. Iceland in Hawaii. Good to see you as well. Unfortunately, this is a bit too late for Stephanie, so she's not here. Yvonne, who's actually an artist among us, welcome to you as well. Okay, so let's continue. If you guys can, could you share the link right now on Twitter? Just say, talking about Van Gogh. I meant to do it. I just kind of didn't get round to it. Okay, so now we're going to deal with the letters. We're going to just jump right in, and we are going to November 1885, and I think it's probably worthwhile just letting you guys know we're going to go from November 1885 to in this particular episode to basically where he leaves Nuenen. He's actually still living in Nuenen, and then he goes to Belgium. He spends a short time there, month or two, and from there he goes to Paris, and that's when his whole life changes. That's when he truly discovers color, and then from Paris he goes to Arles, and he basically awaits the arrival of Paul Gauguin. It's kind of a long period of great expectations, a long period of anticipating his friend's arrival. Then he does arrive, and it's this great triumph, and he's very happy. But then things rapidly unravel. Gauguin sells some of his art. Then he wants to get out of where he is. He's realized, well, Vincent never stops talking, or whatever it is, and then that's a very traumatic. There's a very traumatic incident that follows, and then we reach the end of this series actually just as he goes to the asylum. So the 50 episodes concludes just before he goes to the asylum. And when we reach that point, we can decide, do we want to continue with the chronicles from the asylum? Right, we can do that as almost a separate series. Yeah, it is pretty good, hey? Lorraine says, I like that painting. It looks like someone dancing on the right side. Shall I bring it back up? I don't think it's someone dancing, but it's got a lovely combination of um, brightness and sort of, it's almost like someone who's resisting the winter in a way, right? There's in the background the shadow and the gloom, and in the foreground brightness. Often paintings are done the opposite way. My great grandfather is also a landscape artist. They try to foreground their paintings with the edges of a tree and of grassy verges and whatever. They frame the foreground with shadow in order to contrast the background with light. This is almost the opposite of that. Well, it is the opposite of that. It's quite interesting. Okay. Quick last look at the that other picture. See if I can find a painting that my great grandfather did that does what I'm talking about. Foregrounding in shadow, and then where's a good example? Is this a good example? So yeah, these are some of my great grandfather's paintings. He's also from the Netherlands. You can see how that is. The foreground is in shadow, and then everything behind it is quite well lit. The same kind of thing, but not quite as distinctive. But foreground, shadow, and dark, and then the background looks like that. Same thing there. See if we can get a better example. Foreground in shadow. That's not such a good example. Also not that one. Foreground and shadow. Sometimes it's a very dark foreground. That's also not a great example. This is a landscape in the Netherlands. So I think you can kind of ask yourself, do you think my great grandfather's art is uh, almost as good as Tinus de Jong's? What do you think? Um, Sorry, is my great grandfather's art almost as good as Van Gogh? I'm just trying to find a really good one where the art in the where the painting in the foreground is really dark, but some of them are like almost black in the foreground. But anyway, I think you get the idea. Okay, so let's jump into the letter. If you guys are interested in looking at these um, pictures on your own time, I'll put a link in the description. In the sorry, in the chat. Sorry, I'm a little bit out of it. Okay, so November 1885. Dear Theo, I just received your letter and the enclosure, for which many thanks. I want to answer you at once that I often met with the sayings of Diderot's, and that I think that he fits well into the framework of his time. So once again, he's talking about something that he's read. Van Gogh is a very well read, very well educated painter. He says it's the same with him as with Voltaire himself. When one reads a letter of those men's, even on the most commonplace things or about nothing, there's a brightness and a sparkling spirit in them which charm. Let's not forget that they were the men who made the revolution. And when he says that, little does he know that he's about to start his own sort of painting revolution. Van Gogh's style about to revolutionize art. The whole expressionist thing is he's the father of expressionism, especially his painting Wheatfield with Crows. And so it's quite interesting that that is what he's thinking about here. And that is the work of a genius to dominate one's time. Look at that. And obviously, Van Gogh's work didn't dominate his time, but it has dominated a time subsequent to him. Um, he goes on to say, and to make the minds that are thoughtless and passive strive in one direction and after one aim. So I have all respect for them. Shortly, you will receive two studies of the autumn leaves, one in yellow, poplars, the other in orange, oaks. So it's quite interesting how he um, almost summarizes the entire artwork as a color. Yellow poplars, orange oaks, right? If you have a look here, that is kind of mostly a yellow painting. There's a little bit of red over there. But in his mind, I wanted to make a yellow painting. In his mind, I wanted to make an orange painting. I don't know whether this is faded. That doesn't look particularly orange to me, but it's quite interesting. Our theme color for this channel is orange. And anyway, here is an orange, a painting he describes as orange. Okay. I want to briefly come back to that video played in the beginning. And that's just where I want to just remind you of the legacy of Van Gogh. That his artwork has really touched millions of people. It's world famous. And so I just want to go right to the beginning. Let's play that. So that was just a very quick glimpse at um, the art that he would later produce. So what you're seeing now is very traditional, very much country bumpkin art. He's sort of in the country and he's painting in a oeuvre that's like all the other Dutchmen, right? It's very easy just to paint in that same style, and he's about to depart from that. And thank goodness he does, because he goes on to produce some incredible paintings. You saw a couple of them there. The inside of that restaurant, I think it's called Night Cafe, and then the other one is it's a little bit of a hint at what's to come in Starry Night. It's the view over the I can't remember which river. Is it the Rhine? It's a view over the river from Arles, and I've actually stood right there where he painted that painting. I've stood there in the day. It's very close to the Yellow House, and I've stood there at night. And it's very hard to capture in a photo. I've tried to. It's very hard to capture in a photo the curvature of the river, the street lights on the side, and the whole thing. And that's what makes his painting so amazing, is photography couldn't capture what he does capture. I will show you the photos I took when I was in Arles, but we're a long way from there at this point. Okay. How do I minimize this? Okay. So let's go on to the letter. He says, I'm completely absorbed in the laws of colors. If only they taught us them in our youth. So you can see he is starting an infatuation with color. It's almost like he's just discovered it, right? And he's playing game, he's seeing an entire painting through the lens of color, right? And some might see it through texture, some might see it through contrast, some might see it through perspective. If you take an artist I really like, Keith Alexander, he takes very photorealistic scenes, desert scenes, and he adds a little twist to it. That's the lens through which he sees it. He goes on to say, but it is the fate of most people that by a kind of fatality, one has to seek for light for a long time. Quite interesting words, quite poetic, isn't it? For that, the laws of color, for which Delacroix was the first to use, like Newton did for gravitation, and like Stevenson did for steam, that those laws of colors are a ray of light is absolutely certain. Now, we're living in a time, in terms of these letters, we're living in a time where the Eiffel Tower doesn't actually exist. Street lights are coming into being. There's no internet, no phones whatsoever. Electricity isn't a thing yet either. If they want lights, they use candles, and cars don't exist, right? So it's just before all of a lot of those things, and so what needs to change also is that the art needs to change from being infatuated with the landscape to seeing the world in a different way. So when you see Starry Night, you're seeing the electricity in the sky. You're seeing some of the things that telescopes are seeing in the universe for kind of the first time, seeing galaxies. All of that is a nod to that. It's a nod to a kind of enlightenment and a kind of surge towards a new modern way of thinking, something that is beyond the poetry of the countryside. Sharon says, my British grandfather painted Canadian landscapes with oil. You must send us some of his pictures. You must maybe email me, Sharon, or send me something on Instagram, and then we'll put them on Patreon. Yeah, yeah, he's seeing in color. It was an incredible time in history. In a way, it's an incredible time in history now. And the 60s were also an incredible time in history. So it seems like we potter on, and then suddenly we decide we really want to do something, and then things happen. The internet has changed our lives to a large extent. Smartphones, the ordinary person's life has changed remarkably. space travel may do the same thing. We'll see. Thanks a lot, Iceland. Thanks a lot. Okay. So he goes on to say, so just to come back to this for a moment, you may think, if you are someone out there, you don't know anything about Van Gogh, you might say, this is going to be really boring. Like, so it's this Dutch artist that's doing his thing. Is he complaining about his life all the time? Is he saying how depressed he is? And you have these references to Newton and gravitation, Stevenson and steam. His Van Gogh is sharing with us in language that sounds very fresh and sounds very colloquial. Is sharing with us a glimpse of his time, which makes us feel like time travelers, doesn't it? I mean, that's the other, besides getting to know Van Gogh very well, we get to know his world very well, because his letters are so detailed, because his job is to look at the world, right? His job is to see what is going on around him, not just color, but get a intimate sense of what is happening in the world, right? Anyway, he goes on to say, I've made another autumn study of the pond in the garden at home. I wonder if we can find that. Okay, let's see if I click over here. That's unfortunately in black and white. Let's see if I can find it in color. Obviously, the last thing you want to see is a painting in black and white. So let's see if we can find it. It's either here. Well, I don't know. I almost prefer it in black and white. These colors just don't do it for me. I would have imagined it slightly different. So I'm going to show you the actual painting. Now, before I do, imagine this in color, what you would see. Look at this and then kind of close your eyes. I'm going to tell you when to open your eyes, but have a look at this. Imagine it in color. And right, close your eyes, imagine this in color. And then I'll tell you when to open your eyes. Keep your eyes closed. Okay, open your eyes. It's not quite what you would expect, is it? I would have had this slightly more green, I think, or just black. I don't know, but this to me is very, very yellow and very, very orange. It's kind of like false color, if you ask me. This is to me not a terribly good painting. It actually does, in a weird way, look better in black and white, doesn't it? It does, in a weird way, look better in black and white, because the color just doesn't really look right to me. I like these colors, but this is way, way, way too orange to my mind. Don't know what you guys think. So I think he did well in that. That's a good execution. That's a good execution. That's, to me, not terribly good. I don't know what's going on over there. Don't know what that's about. So you kind of get the idea. He's still finding his way. Let's see what you guys are saying. Oh, Sharon says I wasn't far off. That's interesting. There you go. That's interesting. Saw the baby blue and white sky. Bridget says too much of the same tones. Okay, so if we continue, just bring myself back a little. He says, there decidedly is a picture in that spot. I already tried to get it last year. You kind of get the idea with those words. He's saying there's a painting there, but I still can't nail it down. Then he says, the one I made now is a rather stiff composition. To the right, two trees, orange and yellow in the center, two bushes of gray-green to the left. Shall we, I think what I'm going to do is, do that. I want to try and read this to you while you're looking at the picture. So he says, the one I made now is a rather stiff composition. To the right, two trees, orange and yellow. To the left, two trees of brownish yellow. In front of them, a black pond, a foreground of withered grass, the background, a glimpse over the hedge on a very vivid green. I don't see the very vivid green, but that's what I was expecting to see, was some green. A sky of slate gray and dark blue to harmonize with this in strength. It's interesting that he describes the sky as slate gray, slate being the kind of color you would associate with roof tiles. And the tiles of their house in Nuenen was slate. It's interesting. And I've actually got some slate here, I think. This is from Nuenen. And these are roof tiles. And you can see that they are kind of, shall I show you a little bit? These are, this is slate. This is from Nuenen. And you can see it's gray. And it sort of has that, obviously when the sun shines on it at an angle, it can be a very light gray. I don't know if I can, it can be a very light gray. So let's bring back that picture of the sky. And then you do that, and can you see it's just almost a similar picture to the sky? If I do that, similar, right? And so he describes the sky as slate gray. See that? There's another one. So it's interesting how when he sees the sky and he sees these tiles around him, he's almost saying, wow, it actually looks similar to me. That's how artists tend to see the world around them. Anyway, so that's that. So then he says, I'm sure that they will find it too black and too dark, but the time of making dark studies is always too short. I enclosed the book by someone Blanc in the box with the studies. Also, a Bible which those at home gave me for you, which I painted a still life. So that's quite interesting. That is now another reference to the painting that really symbolizes his father. And again, look at how much detail he goes into describing these other paintings. He goes into all that detail. And then when he talks about this painting, which is really about his father, it's very discreet. It's very limited. He just says, I've enclosed a book and a Bible, which those at home gave me for you, of which I painted a still life. And I guess that is their father's Bible. And he doesn't even say Dad's Bible. He just says, a Bible which those at home gave me for you. He doesn't even say Mom gave me or a sister. It's almost like there's some enmity going on. You kind of get the idea that he can't even say their names, possibly because maybe they blame him for their father's death. Maybe they blame him in the sense of he was causing a lot of stress for the family. And so maybe they literally blame him for what has happened. So it's interesting. This Bible, he asks for it, and then he sends it to his brother. He sends it to Theo, and it's quite interesting that he doesn't want it. I mean, you would imagine that he could have, as the firstborn son, he could have basically inherited his father's Bible. He was also a preacher once upon a time, and so it's quite interesting that he says, "No, don't give it to me. You take it." And so, can you see? There's almost a painful sense of um, he remembers his father, but he doesn't want to talk about it. There's almost a sense that when his father died, they were at loggerheads, and that is a source of pain for him. Can you see that? Yeah, well, it is distancing language. It is distancing language. Okay. So again, no real reference to his father or to his family. And then he continues, he says, "Don't let it trouble you when in my studies I just leave the brushstrokes as I put them on, with smaller or larger clots of paint. That doesn't matter at all. Look at the detail he's going into here about how he's painting, and zero detail, like one line, um, and very vague references in that paragraph. He goes on to say that doesn't, if one leaves them for a year and then scrapes them off quickly with a razor, one gets a much more solid color than would be the case after painting thinly. And this scraping off has been done by the old masters as well as by the French painters of today. It's quite weird. It's almost like he paints a painting, comes back to it a year later, scrapes things away, and then the color inside the paint, the original paint, flows through. Again, he's got a very creative way of looking at something that would ordinarily be quite a static process. He almost sees an afterlife in terms of the paint and the painting. So he says, I believe that I believe that glacis of a transparent color often gets quite dark and disappears in time if they are applied before the picture in its preparation. If they are applied before the picture in its preparation is thoroughly dry, but applied later, they will certainly keep. You yourself made the observation that my studies in the studio became better rather than worse in color in the course of time. I think this comes from laying the colors on thickly and not using oil. When it is a year old, the little oil which the paint always contains has evaporated and the healthy solid part remains. This question, that of painting so that it keeps, is rather important. So think about what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with an artist whose art is going to be worth millions. It is kind of important that his painting does keep, but the reality is a lot of his paintings have faded over 100 and something years. If you look at, I've seen the real wheat field with crows in the Van Gogh Museum. It's a little bit more khaki um, than the bright original. It definitely has faded. That is true of a lot of art. He says, I think it is a pity that some durable colors like cobalt are so expensive. I do not know what you think of the chromates and dark carmines, but I can quite understand that, especially the American sunsets. You know, those kinds of paintings that are obtained by glacis of chromates only last an exceedingly short time. So there's actually a reference to American sunsets. How do you think he's aware of that? Well, he's seen American art. He's seen references to that possibly in magazines, maybe seen prints of American art. It's becoming a little bit of a more global thing. The fact that there's ships going to and fro, they don't have aeroplanes at that point. The fact that they have, commercial air travel. I just want to make sure, when was the first flight? Wasn't it 1910 or something? 1903. So yeah, he's about almost 20 years before the first flight that lasted 59 seconds. So instead of that, there are ships going to and fro, and that is allowing a certain amount of um, communication between continents, and that's why he's aware of what's going on in America. Dubigny and Dupree, on the contrary, will keep. Isn't it curious that Van der Meer of Delft in The Hague has kept color so splendidly with that whole series of glaring tones of red, gray, green, gray, brown, blue, black, yellow, white. Then he talks about Haberman's picture in Amsterdam and so on. And then I think let's go on to the next letter. Also from Nuenen, 8 to 12 November. Dear Theo, yesterday evening I received de Goncourt's book. Again, a reminder that he's reading. And does the reading, he doesn't only read about artists, he also reads about maids who have orgies and someone's wife who has affairs. So some of it's not just like art that he's reading. He also reads some pretty salacious stuff. He reads Shakespeare. He reads Emile Zola, all that kind of thing. That influences him. It kind of also makes him a very hard person to find a girlfriend, because in the one hand he's very a simple man. He doesn't have any money. He doesn't really have a proper job, right? And so the kind of people he might associate with, peasants, prostitutes, whatever, um, can't really have a conversation with him because he's so well educated. You don't tend to have such a well-educated person being so poor and kind of being single in a sense. So that kind of makes it quite hard for him. Anyway, he goes on to say, yesterday evening I received de Concord's book. I began to read it at once, and though of course I shall read it over again quietly, I think he's saying he's going to read the book a second time. That also kind of gives you a sense that he's doesn't really have much doesn't have many friends, doesn't have much conversation going on. He's reading a book a second time. I watched the movie Ant-Man and Quantumania or something, and there's the book starts off with Ant-Man has written a book, and it ends with him saying, "Oh, did you read my book?" to his father-in-law, and his father says every goddamn word. Uh, I thought that was quite funny. Um, so he says, I'd been longing for it so much. I do not think he praises Boucher too much. Then he again talks about the rich blue sky, mother of pearl white for a woman's figure. And then, yeah, it's really just talking about this book. He says, I've often longed to know something about the man. Then he says, pastel is a process which I should like to know. I shall certainly try it someday. If one can paint a head, one ought to be able to learn it in a few hours. So there's a period where my brother and I were both trying to become artists, and then you sort of go through, you paint or you draw with a piece of charcoal. You do pencil drawing, so everything is just black and white. And then you try color, you use pastels, and then watercolor. And so you've got to try and learn technique across various, can you say platforms, various, what do they call it? Materials through various, what's the word I'm looking for? So oil, watercolor, pastel, charcoal, um, mediums. That's the word. Thanks for that. That's the word. Terry, you're right. So that's also a way an artist finds his feet. Is he tries different mediums and then finds his feet. Right. My aunt is excellent at at watercolor. She just has this ability to combine the textures of birds in in a sort of swampy or estuarine or uh, birds, water birds in their element. It seems to translate so well to watercolor. You have those soft flowing grays and whites and light browns, very, very faded. And then the sharp contrast to black beaks and the shapes of the feathers and the tails and the legs. She does that really well. Let's see if I can find a quick example of that. Um, I have family members who are artists, and to be honest, I wouldn't really put too many of their art in my home, but my aunt, I definitely would. I really like her style. Let's see if I can find a couple. So you can see it is mostly sort of water birds. There's one, dab chick. Isn't that beautiful? It's a kind of a mixture of realism and kind of poetry. It's got just enough detail that you really see what she's trying to depict, right? It's kind of a combination of something that's dreamy and something that's very specific. This is the kind of thing I would have on my wall. See if I can. Here's another one. Isn't that beautiful? So I can't quite tell if this is. I don't think this is a watercolor. Definitely not a watercolor. Let's see if we can find another watercolor. Um, Spotted eagle owl. Definitely a watercolor. That's not like my favorite. One of my favorites of her work. Let's see if we can find another one that's worthwhile. But this is also watercolor. Also not her best work, but not bad either. See if I can find another Joan Sharwin. This is pretty good. Um, Sorry, I'm just trying to find a really good one. Cape Sparrow. This is a just an ordinary sparrow, and this is that is a watercolor. Okay, I can't really find anymore right now, but you get the idea. You get the idea. Okay. So he says the best pictures, and from a technical point of view, the most complete, seen from nearby, are but patches of color side by side, and only make an effect at a certain distance. This is what Rembrandt stuck to, notwithstanding all the trouble it caused him. In that respect, Chardin is as great as Rembrandt. Israel's is the same, and I, for my part, think Israel's always um, admirable, especially in his technique. It would be too good if everybody knew this and thought like this, as Bonnemort would say. But to work like that, one must be something of a magician to learn, which costs a great deal. And the sad, sarcastic saying of Michelangelo's. Again, what's interesting here is the level of detail he's going into is really kind of obsessed, right? He's really going really deeply into the artist's journey in the context that his father's died. There's no reference whatsoever to that. You kind of get the idea in a way that he's both running away from his father's death and in a way his family, and also um, taking the reins of his own identity for the first time. He's luxuriating. He's taking a kind of agency, reclaiming a kind of agency in terms of his own life, and obviously within the art context. He says, I think I am making progress with my work. Last night, something happened to me, which I will tell you as minutely as I can. So this is giving us an insight into a moment in his life. He says, you know those three pollard oaks at the bottom of the garden at home? A pollard is, it's sort of a tree that has been pruned, that it makes almost like balls. Um, it's almost like it is, the shoulders of the trees are kind of amputated, and then it kind of creates these big balls, and then out of those balls fresh shoots will come out. You'll know what I mean when I show it to you. Anyway, it's a reference to this. It's that kind of thing. That's a tree that's been pruned, and then it grows from you can see in the background there's another one, I think. These are actually pollarded as well, but they're growing out of that. You can't see it so clearly, but they are as well. Okay. I've been at them for 3 days with a canvas. It says the difficulty was the tufts of Havana leaves to model them and give them form, color, tone. Then in the evening, I took it to that acquaintance of mine in Antwerp, where there's a rather stylish drawing room where we put it on the wall. Well, never before was I so convinced that I shall make things that do well. So, in terms of this particular artwork, he decides, I am going to make it as an artist. This, when he puts this painting on a wall and the light falls on it, he feels, I am going to make it as an artist. And this is towards the end of 1885. So he's going to go through 4 years of basically that sentiment being tested, that belief being challenged. Let me go through that again. He says he goes to Antwerp and he goes to another town with his painting, puts it on the wall of a stylish drawing room, and he describes how there's grey wallpaper on the wall and the furniture is black with gold, and so he puts it up on the wall in obviously a situation that's quite I don't want to say classy, but in a style that he thinks brings out the class of the painting. And then he says, I'm convinced that I will succeed in calculating my colors so that I have it in my power to make the right effect. And that is the reason that I stopped drawing. There's a time that my brother and I were drawing like pictures every single day. If family members came to visit, we the first thing we would do is show them our art, and we would often draw in front of them. We'd sort of draw on the table in front of them. And I know when I was in kindergarten, I would go to kindergarten and just draw. Like they couldn't get me to play with other kids because I was just drawing. That went on for weeks, I think even months. And the reason I stopped was I started to feel like the thing I have in my mind and the thing that I'm drawing, that they're not even close to one another. And I did start drawing in an abstract way, but I just sort of felt I can't represent what I have in my mind. I just can't do it. And then that's when I turned to writing. When I felt you can actually draw a picture with words, although it's not the kind of writing I ended up doing wasn't wasn't drawing the pictures with words that I wanted to do. I did I did write this book, which in a way is my portrait, one of the few art portraits I've ever done with words, right? So this is I did at least try to do that. Anyway, so that is the thing that an artist must think about is I've got something in my mind that I want to share. I want to express myself. Or can do I do it in a way that resonates with that? Is there congruency between the message I'm trying to convey on this limited, space? This you know, people are capable of contemplating the cosmos, and then we also go to the toilet. And you, in terms of art, you want to bring the cosmos onto the paper, onto the canvas, not excrement. And so, what is really happening? Anyway, so he goes on to say, I shall succeed in calculating my colors so that I have it in my power to make the right effect. And do you think that that's true? Do you think that he does ultimately succeed in producing that effect? Well, have a look at this. This is quite a powerful painting, right? It ultimately is pretty powerful. Okay, let's get back to the letter. So he says, this was Havana, soft green, even pure white, direct from the tube. Um, now that, now though, Now, though that man has money, though he took a fancy to it, I felt such a glow of courage when I saw that it was good, that as it hung there, it created an atmosphere by the soft, melancholy harmony of that combination of colors that I could not sell it. It's quite interesting. He says he felt a glow of courage, and also that the guy that he hung the picture up in this house in Eindhoven, and the guy there, he says, took a fancy to it, but he couldn't sell it. I don't know whether I believe that though. Like on the one hand, I think he um, you would imagine that he would feel confident and he would feel really happy. And I know my own brothers painted paintings and then said, well, this one's not for sale. And so you do have artists keeping their own work, the work that they really like. For example, Van Gogh, I don't think wanted to give away his sunflowers. Some of them were actually taken without his permission. Um, on the other hand, I do wonder whether he's conning his brother a little bit, where he's saying to his brother, I took this painting somewhere and someone wanted to buy it, but I didn't want to sell it. I do wonder whether that's completely honest. I just can't help thinking that way. Yvonne says, I have some paintings that I cannot sell too, meaning you don't want to sell them, right? Not that you can't sell them, you don't want to sell them. I've executed some artworks that I've sold that I really wish I could have back. I can see them in my mind. I'm talking about paintings, pictures that I did. I really wish I could have them back. Just wouldn't really know where to find them. Anyway, he says, but as he had a fancy for it, I gave it to him, and he accepted it just as I had intended, without many words, namely, little more than the thing is damn good. The thing is damn good. I think that's a good title for this video. I've just quickly changed it. Um, no, it's not allowing me to change it. Okay. To see if I can. Anyway, I guess I can change it a little bit later. Or am I going to forget? Let me just quickly do that. I want to kind of encourage you guys as well. If you're listening to one of these Van Gogh letters and we come across his own words that really epitomize what we're dealing with, then let me know in the chat. I think that's quite a good. So it's quite interesting that this is coming up, and 4 years are going to pass. He's not going to sell anything. It's quite a tragic set of circumstances. I don't think so yet myself. Okay, so there you have it. He is a little bit. He talks about a glow of courage, but then he also says, "I don't think so yet myself." To be honest, I don't think this is terribly good art. I mean, I don't think that's particularly good. I think that is pretty good. That's this to me is possibly his best painting to date, in my opinion. It's a lot better than the Potato Eaters. Possibly because it's one of the most colorful paintings to date. First, I must see a little more of Chardin, Rembrandt, Old Dutch, and French painters and think it over well because I want to make it more elaborate with less paint than I used, for instance, in this thing. Well, what he actually does need to do is just go to Paris. Then that's going to help him find his way. Now, as to that acquaintance of mine and his opinion of pictures, when someone with a clear, intelligent head paints still life and works out of doors every day, if only for a year, he need not therefore be an art critic, neither does he feel he's a painter yet, but for all that he will observe more originally than many others. So he's simply saying somebody goes out there and paints out of doors every day will just be a more observant person. Besides, his character is not just like everybody's. For instance, he was originally intended to become a priest. At a certain moment, he flatly refused this and carried his point, in which not exactly everyone in Brabant succeeds, and there is something broad minded and loyal about him. I'm not quite sure who he's referring to. Is he referring to himself or the guy in Antwerp? And I'm not 100% sure. Um, Zola once referred to this something in a conversation between Murray and his schoolfellow when he let Murray get serious and say that it had cost him a great deal to free himself from that time and its influence, but that he had wanted to live and that he had lived. Many who undertake to change fall back, don't come any further than a certain insipid Methodism because they don't take their measures energetically enough. but this is not the case with him. He is a man of importance in his little world. So one does get the sense that he's talking about someone else, but that is very much inspired by that. He wants to do the same thing. He wants to be. Do you agree with this? That Van Gogh wants to be a man of importance in his little world. He doesn't want to be famous. He doesn't want to be powerful. He simply wants to be a man of importance inside his little world. Do you agree with that? Do you know that the Goncourts have made etchings and drawings? You must not think me unpractical when I persist in encouraging you either to draw or to paint. You wouldn't be a failure either. If you just set yourself to it, the result would not be unsatisfactory either. And especially as an art dealer, especially as an art expert. I do kind of wonder why he does this, because it doesn't make any sense that both brothers become artists, especially when the one is failing. I wonder if it's a kind of mind fuckery where when he and it's not a nice thing to say about Van Gogh, but it makes you wonder whether he's not uh, kind of doing a mind job on his brother, kind of saying, "Why don't you become an artist? Why don't you try it?" And that feeling his brother may have, which is fear, insecurity, uncertainty, is going to give him a sense of, okay, I understand your position, right? Doesn't it feel a little bit like that, or am I being too cynical? Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mind job. He's being a bit manipulative, but maybe I'm wrong, because it doesn't make any sense that his brother, who's financing all this, also becomes an artist. To like start now at this point just doesn't make any sense. He says, I refer once more to that acquaintance of mine. It is exactly a year ago that I saw him for the first time, when I made that large sketch of a watermill. That's that. Look how that is just the colors of slime and excrement, right? So he's come quite a long way from that to that. That's quite a transition. Although there's still signs of excrement in his paintings. He's still infatuated with gray and slime. Here with a description of a study by that acquaintance of mine, some roofs, backs of houses, factory chimneys, dark against an evening sky. That evening sky, blue, changing at the horizon into a glow between the clouds of smoky color, with orange or rather ruddy reflections. The masses of houses, dark yet of a warm stone color. A silhouette that has been something gloomy and threatening. The foreground, a vague plot in the dusk, black sand, faded grass, a bit of garden with a few dark, melancholy apple trunks with here and there a tuft of yellow autumn leaves. Is he talking about this painting? Seems to be. It was all his idea alone, but isn't it a good conception, a real impression, well felt? But one doesn't become a painter in one year, nor is it necessary. But there is already one good thing among the lot, and one feels hopeful, instead of feeling helpless before a stone wall. I do not know how I shall fare in the future. At present, when I read of that splendid devil, that famous Latour, by God, how real it is, and how well that fellow, except for his enormous passion for money, has attacked life and painting. I don't know, just that reference to stone wall makes me think about Nicola Bully and what Paul said about her, that we've come up against a brick wall. I wonder whether it didn't feel like she had come up against a brick wall, that she couldn't get over something. That statement has really stood out to me. I never really thought it might refer to um, the psychology of a brick wall. I thought it might refer to an actual brick wall. Anyway, Then he says, only recently I saw Franz Hals. Well, you know how enthusiastic I was about it, how I immediately wrote you a long letter about painting in one stroke. So he's already gotten quite um, caught up in this idea of painting in a feverish way, painting in this very quick way, and that is very idiosyncratic about Van Gogh. Is that he compare Van Gogh to Gauguin? Van Gogh paints can execute a painting in an hour or 2 hours. That's super quick. That is really really quick, and that kind of aggravated Gauguin, who would take 4 days. Anyway, he says, how great is the similarity between the ideas of Latour? And I think Van Gogh kind of felt like Gauguin criticized him for painting too quickly, saying, you need to think about it, you need to feel it. And he was saying, I do. This is another way of doing it. Anyway, I don't know what I shall do and how I shall fare, but I hope not to forget the lessons which I am thus learning these days in one stroke, but with absolutely complete exertion of one's whole spirit and attention. At present, I like nothing better than working with a brush, drawing with it too, instead of making a sketch in charcoal. He's saying, I enjoy the oil painting work, I'm not enjoying sketching. When I ask myself how the old Dutch masters work, I find so relatively few real drawings and how wonderfully they draw. But I think in most cases they began, continued, and finished with their brush. They did not fill in. Van Goyen, for instance, I just saw that one of his in the Dupper collection, an oak tree on a dune in the storm, and the coop view of Dordrecht. An astonishing technique done with nothing and quite naturally, clear of paint and apparently quite simple. But either in figure or in landscape, how the painters always did try to convince people that a picture is something different from nature in a mirror, different from imitation, i.e., recreation. So here he's saying that a painting shouldn't just be like a photo. A painter must try to add something to it, add feeling to it, add some kind of interpretation to it. And that's what I love about my Aunt Joan's watercolors. They do that. They add a, almost a romantic sense to nature. I really like this. Where is it now? I really like that sort of thing. That's adding to nature. It's giving texture to something that is quite beautiful. It's turning the peripheral, um, whatever the leaves, into um, something softer that really brings out the striking beauty of nature. Won't let me make it any bigger than that. Oh, there it does. Okay. Can you see how there's such subtlety in showing that is water? That's water. There are just a few hints that is water, and then you see it. It's just enough there to for you to see that there's water, and then there's no further effort in painting the water, right? Do you see that? Almost like magic. Okay, so then he says, I read this. I thought about Van der Meer of Delft. If one sees his city view at the Hague close up, it is incredible and painted with entirely different colors than one would suspect at a few steps distance. Okay. He says, goodbye. I had to tell you at once how I admire de Goncourt's book. Ever yours, Vincent. Okay. Let's go to the next letter. Still in November. Dear Theo, would it greatly amaze you? Let's suppose those at home intend to move between March and May. So here's so far quite a rare reference to home, to his actual situation. Bear in mind, his father's died, he's still living at home, and he's trying to find his way from here. He's finding his way in terms of his art, but practically speaking, where's he going to live? What is he going to do? Who's he going to surround himself with? And you kind of get the idea that they don't want him there and he doesn't want to be there either. But also, what's the financial arrangement going to be, right? So he says, would it greatly amaze you something happened to mother before that time? Not quite sure what that means. Um, so he's talking about those at home moving um, between March and May. Um, and I think he would end up moving in sort of around February to Paris. I think he's sorry, to Belgium. He's about to move to Belgium. He's very close himself to moving somewhere else. Now and then, this thought occurs to me when I go there. I have the impression that lately there's been a change. Aging is such a strange thing. So you kind of get the sense that he has been avoiding his family in a way, and now is really addressing it. Now he's acknowledging it. He's talking about growing old. He says, and it is absolutely certain that there are many cases of a wife's not outliving her husband by long. It's quite weird. He's actually talking about his mother dying. And his mother wouldn't die. In fact, his mother would outlive him. But that's the thought that's in his mind. The change observed is that at times mother's thoughts are more lucid, whereas during these last months there were long periods when they seemed more or less fuzzy, which is really not to be wondered at. For a time, there was something overwrought in her due to, at least so I imagined, the void around her and the feeling of loneliness. And it's so strange that almost like he's got schizophrenia. It's so weird how he goes from being totally focused on um, his art and on color, and then suddenly it's almost like he realizes, well, my mom is quite lonely. My mom is struggling. My mom might be overwrought. It's almost like he remembers that he's a human being. He imagines there must be a void around her and a feeling of loneliness. You kind of get the feeling, as much as we may find Van Gogh interesting, you kind of get the feeling he's a bit of an arsehole as well. He, at the time that his mother probably needs him or needs someone, needs support, he's very selfishly just going on with his art, right? Yeah, his thinking is mom's going to die soon. Not a very nice thought, and it turns out not to be true either. Um, you do get the sense that his mother didn't think terribly highly of him. I don't know whether she would have depression, but she may certainly have just had that normal grieving process. Somebody dies, you should grieve. Grief isn't the same as depression. But who knows? Maybe she went into a bit of a depression. Who knows? He doesn't use that word though. He says that her thoughts were fuzzy and that she felt lonely. He doesn't really use the word. I don't know if he even talks about unhappiness. Then he says, now it struck me that she has turned quite calm and collected. Something resolute has taken the place of the worrying. Nothing more is to be seen. So it seems like he's saying that his mother just suddenly collected herself, got a handle on everything, and has now become, well, he uses the word resolute. And you get the same sense from Van Gogh himself, that he pulls himself up by his bootstraps, even when there's a serious setback. He decides, okay, that's enough. I'm gonna be in charge of my emotions. I'm going to take charge of my fate. Don't you get a sense of that? Yeah, like a mind fog, just being a little bit disoriented by, something traumatic. I do not think it impossible that to her, I'm not quite sure what that means. That seems to be a bit of a typo. I do not think it impossible that to her death may come unexpectedly and softly, just as it came to father, and for a similar reason. So here is a extremely rare reference to his father. It's the first time he's really said the word father in don't know how many letters, even though he's referring to a painting about his father. And it seems like this entire letter is about the family, which makes it quite special, quite unique. And we need to pay attention now. He says, seeing that I was struck by it, and because Will, that's his other sister, when I discussed it with her, she told me that she had also observed that mother was changing a great deal and that it made her uneasy too. I'm writing to let you know. So, in other words, he's actually saying the fact that mother had this fog and she seemed lonely and she seemed to be so struggling that there was almost a sense that she might die soon as well. She suddenly just came together. She kind of suddenly seemed resolute, and is saying that him and his sister were wondering, is this actually a bad sign? What has she actually decided? What has been going on inside of her mind and inside of her heart? He says, for the rest, one might say that mother is looking particularly well. But there's something that makes me think of what I told you. I don't think it would be a bad idea at all if mother made a few trips shortly to Anna, to Amsterdam, to Cor, especially as she seems to be resolved on it and to long to see them all once more. It might well be that she herself as a presentiment that at the same time it will be a leave taking. So that's quite extraordinary that he seems to be suggesting that he imagines his mother may die soon, and he imagines that she knows she may die soon, so she's kind of going to go and say farewell to other family members. I've got to tell you, before my mother died, I um, I'm not quite sure what I was thinking, but I wrote a book. I wrote this book, or another version of this book, and the character's mother died in that book, and I found that very um, very troubling. So I'm writing a book. This is when I was in high school, and in the narrative of the book, the main character's mother dies, and I found that, as I say, really, really troubling. Um, yeah. So he's talking about the same thing, a presentiment, and obviously it turned out to be wrong. She, as I say, she outlived um, both of her sons. On the other hand, it's possible that maybe she did have some of those thoughts in mind, or did think that her mortality was, she may have had a kind of a paranoia, and she thought that her mortality was on the cards. Um, and then she changed her mind, or circumstances change, if I can put it that way. So it could be that what he's seeing is true at that moment in time. Okay, so he says, This month I had to pay my rent, and at the same time I gave notice that I shall leave my studio toward May. So there it is making his feelings clear where he intends to be. Um, its drawback is, as you know, that I am greatly handicapped by the neighbors, and I notice that people are still afraid of the priest, though perhaps he wouldn't meddle any further. Bear in mind he had an affair with the neighbor's daughter, whose father was a priest. But since there's been trouble once, the best thing is a radical change. So it seems like he's saying the best thing for me is a radical change. I need to go somewhere else. And that is what he's about to do. What we're dealing with now are his very last moments, essentially in the Netherlands. When he leaves the Netherlands, as far as I know, he will never come back again. Once he sets foot outside of the Netherlands, that's it. It's like a one-way trip. He basically goes to Belgium, from Belgium to Paris, from Paris to the south of France, and then from then on, there's very little of his life left. He never returns to the Netherlands. So you might be feeling, cheapest, when is this going to get exciting? Or when are we going to deal with Paris? When are we going to deal with all of that is exciting. But I think you've also got to think about the circumstances within which the context within which he leaves the Netherlands. The context is that it's formative. He leaves within the context of the death of his father. He steps into himself. He becomes alive and develops agency and confidence after his father dies. Now, I don't necessarily think that's needed. A lot of people develop confidence and agency regardless of their parents. But I'm saying in terms of Van Gogh, it's quite interesting the moment that he steps into himself. It's almost like the shadow of his father recedes and then the sun shines on him in a way. Anyway, he says, the last thing I painted is rather big. It's an old mill on the barren heath, a dark silhouette against an evening sky. Now, this is an uneasiness that I arrived at on my own, however, to such a degree that I feel obliged to inform you of it. But as mother goes to see Van der Loo, almost like my surname, anyway, Van der Loo, from time to time, we may expect him to warn us if there is anything to be warned of. So he's referring to an uneasiness, and it's the same thing. You kind of wonder, did Paul Ansel feel an uneasiness in terms of um, Nicola? Should he have felt an uneasiness? Should he have done more? I'm a bit uneasy with the fact that he doesn't seem to acknowledge what is even possible. He doesn't seem to acknowledge that. I find that makes me uneasy. Is there? There doesn't seem to be a reference to this old mill on the barren heath. Let's see if we can find that painting. Is it this? I don't know if it's this. This looks way too. 1885. See if we can find it. I can't really find it. Is it this one? Well, he does paint an old mill, but this is from 1888, so this is not what he's talking about. You can actually see just how much color is in this old mill. It's totally different to, it's much lighter and brighter. There are blues and yellows and greens and a lot of white. He seemed to be infatuated with black. 3 years later, that's the way he's painting. So I can't find this old mill, but what you've just seen is an old mill in all. So he says, if it should be a passing similar to father's, it's actually talking about his mother's death. That is to say, sudden. It is equally possible that it will happen within a few days as within a few years. So that is pretty shocking, is that he's literally almost been in denial about his own father's death, and now he's sort of actively anticipating his mother's death, and not in a particularly sensitive way. He doesn't say, I'm going to go and see her and I will assist her or whatever. It just seems to be like, I'm aware of it. Anyway, he says, so who can tell? If the lucidity and the calm persist, I personally expect a crisis after the trip that is within a short time and dying without a struggle. But sometimes it happens that the mind gets a little clouded, then things drag on, and then it may still be necessary to struggle through much suffering and worry. Please think over whether I am not right in setting the two chances against each other, either an early death without suffering or the other thing. Can you believe it? In his letter to his brother, he's saying, can you tell me what do you think is going to happen? Is she going to die quickly or slowly? This is a pretty shocking letter. And I don't think it reflects terribly well on Vincent van Gogh as a person, does it? So if you want to read this on your own time, um, it's from mid-November 1885. Yeah, that is also a good point, Helena. Okay, so let's go to the next letter. 4 November to 24 November. So I think we're going to do one more letter. We're going to stop on this letter. So we've actually got quite a few still to get through. Okay, so let's try and go through these fairly quickly. So he says, Dear Theo, in de Goncourt's book, I found the following sentence in the article about Chardin marked by you. After having talked about the bad financial conditions of painters, he says, what to do, what to become. One must throw oneself into subordinate condition or starve. One chooses the first. So that's quite an interesting acknowledgement where he says, he acknowledges the question, what must I do? What must I become? Well, I must allow myself to be in a subordinate condition. In other words, I must be prepared to struggle. I must be prepared to have troubles and difficulty. And this is once again confirmation that Van Gogh isn't someone who would commit suicide at the first sign of trouble. He's totally signing himself up to the artist's struggle. And that was true in 1885, that was true in 1886, 87, 88, 89, 90. We've seen how he responds to the death of his father. He seems to actually come through it fairly well. And how does he respond? By painting more industriously. Painting is a creative, is kind of a creative and a constructive response to trauma for him. Don't you get that idea? That he's able to transcend trauma by being creative. It's a creative answer to a source of anxiety. Yeah, that does seem to be the case. Sorry, not that. Then he says, after all, this has remained true up to now. Now, I don't want to defend Van Gogh. I don't want to say that not being empathetic is right. I'm not saying that at all. But what I do think is fair to say is, how empathetic have people been towards him? what I am saying is, which people around him are kind of sympathetic to his situation and to his um, plight? And the answer is very, very few. You could almost say just Theo. So there may be a little bit of a sense of, why should I care, or why should I be that compassionate when you're not particularly empathetic to me or my situation? You just do wonder whether that's part of his thought process. So that is the other side of it. I mean, he ended up living a very lonely life. Did he ever have really a girlfriend? Did he have a wife? Did he have a friend even? Did he have a real friend besides his brother? And so you can legitimately say, should he really care that much about people around him? Um, you might answer yes, he should, but then you could equally say, well, shouldn't those around him care about him? He does have a bit of a hard shell, that's true. Okay, so let's go back. So he says, after all, this has remained true up to now. It's also interesting, he talks about martyrs. And that is how Gauguin saw Vincent van Gogh. And I came across, while I was trying to divvy up the next 15 episodes, after he lost his ear, he wrote a letter to his brother where he said, I don't want to be a martyr, right? I'm not doing this to be a martyr. I'm not trying to be a martyr. And yet, that is how Gauguin saw Van Gogh. And ultimately, I think he ended up being quite a martyr. And I think the whole Emile Zola thing pushes the whole martyring narrative, that live if you live in a simple way, if you live humbly, if you live a life of self-sacrifice, then that is heroic. And he really liked that idea. That's why he became a pastor in the Borinage, why he lived the way that he did. And so I think, although consciously he doesn't like the idea of being a martyr, I think he ends up living that way anyway. Anyway, he says, so I just think thinking about Van Gogh as a martyr is a very interesting way of trying to address the reality of who he really was, and his approach to martyrdom. I mean, did he literally cut off his own ear, or did someone else cut off his ear and then he martyred himself, in the sense of he took it upon himself, the blame? The same thing, did somebody shoot him and then he became a martyr in the sense that he said, no, I shot myself? Um, because I think you could summarize the life of Van Gogh, the legend of Van Gogh, as a martyr for his art, wouldn't you say? Dover, hope you sleep well. Run the World says, do you think his relationship with his dad was reflected in the Bible painting? Well, first of all, yes. His relationship, the overpowering and giant Bible above his little tattered notebook. Well, absolutely. I think he is saying, my father was this big, solid, um, uh, kind of traditional, heavy, oppressive presence. And he made me feel small, and he pushed me to the side. And I had small little aspirations that were dwarfed by his influence and by his power. And actually, I exist, and actually, I've got a point to make, and it's um, and so he's acknowledging that dynamic um, in quite an intuitive way. I think, quite an intuitive way. So yes, absolutely, that's absolutely right. Okay, so he goes on to say, as you had marked the above, I thought it possible, especially as I just mentioned to you that I'm going to give up my present studio, that you might want to know what I intend to do. You might know what I'm going to do. So his brother doesn't actually ask him. He assumes from the fact that his brother underlined that what to do, what to become. His brother doesn't say, Vincent, what are your plans? Instead, Vincent sees his brother's underlined something and says, I'm going to assume you're asking me a question and I'm going to answer it. So he says, the present days are not quite exactly like those of Chardin, and there are a few things which can hardly be argued away at present. The number of painters is much larger. It's kind of acknowledging that it's almost like a YouTuber on YouTube. There are a lot of other YouTubers. There's a lot of competition. He's saying there are a lot of painters out there. It's not going to be easy. Now, it always makes a fatal impression on the public when the painter takes a job on the side. I don't feel above this at all. So he's saying, you know what, Theo, maybe I should get like a day job. Maybe I should do something on the side. Maybe I should try and earn a little bit of money. But he says, but that creates a fatal impression. And he says, I don't feel above this. I don't feel like I'm too good to do that. But he says, I should say, go on painting, just make 100. And if that is not enough, 200 studies and see if this doesn't help you more than the job on the side. There is his attitude in a nutshell. He's basically saying, I could get a job on the side, but you know what? What if through a force of nature, what if through just incredible discipline and incredible work ethic and incredible self belief? What if I overwhelm the entropy? If I just produce enough art, eventually it's got to be good enough that it gets sold, right? And it reminds me of, in a way, the when you're a swimmer, when you train as a swimmer, as I have, you jump in the pool and you're looking at the tiles at the bottom and you're just swimming up and down, and somewhere in your mind you're thinking, well, I hope I'm going to get fit enough so that when I race I'm going to do well. But there is this sort of incredible repetition. I mean, there's nothing like swimming. You in a 25-meter pool, you're in a 50-meter pool, you just go up and down, up and down, you just see the tiles moving. And what keeps you going, well, is this idea of improvement, that every time you going up and down, every successive time, perhaps you're getting a little bit stronger, perhaps you're getting a little bit faster, perhaps you're getting a little bit more efficient, perhaps you're getting a little bit better at resisting the cold and the pain, and the discipline is hardening, and being reinforced, right? um, I also think I had a similar attitude where if I just write enough magazine articles, right? If I just write enough magazine articles, I'm eventually going to be able to walk into a book publisher's office and say my name, and they, oh, I know you. I've read hundreds of articles that you've written. Don't you want to write a book? And that never ever happened. Um, it was a little bit different with me because the first books I wrote sold like hotcakes. So it wasn't like I said I'm going to write 100 books and eventually the 100th book will sell. It was actually the opposite. I wrote this book, nobody cared about it, and then I wrote Reeve in Her Own Words, and everyone cared about that. And then that was that story. Then I just wrote more and more and more books. And the question is, am I going to end that writing career with the kind of books that I wanted to write, fiction books? We'll see. At this point, probably not. But anyway, from Van Gogh's perspective, he's basically saying, if I just paint 100 paintings or 200 or 300, eventually I'm going to get there. And that's the tragedy of his life, is that he didn't ultimately get there. And you felt like he had to have, if he did live a bit longer, he had to have gotten there. And this is the part where I totally disagree with the whole suicide narrative is why, if he was intending on committing suicide, did he paint the most paintings he'd ever painted in the shortest space of time at that time of his life? In other words, he was trying to get to that point where he is where he overcomes the entropy, and arguably that is when he did reach that point. I mean, Dr. Gachet liked his art so much that he took it home from the funeral. That he said, I'm going to take these paintings." Um, I've got two paintings, copies, two very big paintings on my wall in my bedroom from the very last weeks of his life. So, as far as I'm concerned, those paintings are good, right? And then I've also got two additional paintings that also from that period that are smaller, also in my bedroom, but also from that same period. In other words, as far as I'm concerned, in the last 2 months of his life, he was painting so much that he did reach that point of he knows what he's doing. And writing is the same way. If you stop writing, you can't just start up again. You've got to learn the craft all over again. Painting, same. You've got to paint, 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 and eventually you find that golden thread. You find the zone. You find that state of flow. It doesn't just happen like this. It happens after countless executions. When I almost died in the sea, when I swam out to that rock, and I said to myself, eventually, I mean, I wanted to be saved, and I wanted people to come out to me, and then I just said, "Look, Nick, just swim. You're not going to be saved. You need to just swim to the coast." I think when I did swim, I don't remember that, but I think I was in some kind of subconscious state of flow that had been built on hundreds, perhaps thousands of training sessions at 5 o'clock in the morning, that had become a kind of programming where you're almost sleeping while you're swimming. It was very, very similar to swimming in very cold water where you are almost lights out. The water's so cold, but the programming, that reptilian part of your brain is allowing all of this other activity to take place, almost like sleepwalking. The lights are on, but no one's home, right? The problem is with Van Gogh, is that attitude didn't work. He was too. Um, the discipline was great, and the work ethic was great, but what he didn't do was look at what was going on around him. And maybe he could have sharpened up his image a bit, dressed better, try to ingratiate himself more with patrons. He was doing that with Dr. Gachet. I think ultimately he messed it up by fraternizing with Dr. Gachet's daughter. In a way, you can't blame him, but in another way, um, that's what that's the situation. Yeah, primal instinct kicked in. Uh, Iceland says, I got lost in the snow once up to my chest. I was so hot and out of breath. It was like having to swim out of it. Um, can I tell you a quick story about that? I once went, it's a little bit different to that, but I once went hiking with a friend. His name was Bernard, a guy from New Zealand. I once went hiking with him in the mountains of South Korea. And it had snowed, and anyway, we ended up walking um, through this ravine, and we ended up in snow up to about here. And I was wearing a kind of canvas pants, a kind of canvas trousers that was very, very thin and not waterproof. And I suddenly realized, I said to Bernard, I'm getting extremely cold and my trousers are actually sopping wet, and I'm gonna have to run in order to get warm. I'm starting to feel this, like the white fangs of like a deathly cold sinking into me. I said, we've got to get out of here, and I'm going to need to run because I'm so cold right now. And so that's exactly what we did. We turned around, retraced our steps, slowly got to a lower level of the snow, right? And by now, like the feeling in my legs was almost gone, and then we just started running, and that's ultimately how we sorted it out. We ran ourselves warm. A little bit different, but also quite a scary situation to be in. Hypothermia, that's it. And so when you think about Nicola Bully and you say, I can't imagine someone being from 100% normal to death. That's how quickly it can happen if you're cold. We warm-blooded animals, if you are exposed for a length of time to very cold conditions, you don't live very long. Just that, you don't live very long. Um, anyway, accustoming. So something else, just to finish the point in that, there's a lady, a grandmother in, I think, a place called Ceres. She was in an old age home in Ceres, and her carer, her job was to take her in a wheelchair out at night so she could smoke a cigarette, and the carer just forgot about it, just forgot that she was still out there, and they found her dead the next morning. She didn't die because she was murdered. She died of the cold. So that's how potent the cold can be. That's how potent the cold can be. Let's see if I can find it. Series death. That is from this story. Series nursing home rocked by death of woman who was allegedly forgotten outside overnight. So she didn't even have water on her. She simply was left outside in the cold and died. So that's the story that I'm referring to. Okay, let's get back to this. So the other reason why you can think about Van Gogh being a tough SOB is he was saying you've got to become accustomed to poverty as an artist. Accustoming oneself to poverty, seeing how a soldier or laborer lives and thrives in wind and weather, with ordinary people's fare and dwelling, is just as practical as earning a few guilders more a week. So what he's saying here is, I'm signing up for quite a tough life. And to be honest, his life in Auvers-sur-Oise at the end of his life was actually pretty good. He went to a doctor's pretty luxurious home quite often. He had meals there quite often. He had quite a lot of social interaction there quite often. He stayed in the Revue Inn, was quite nice quarters as well. He had pretty nice meals there quite often. If you compare that to the asylum was really grim. He had no friends there. So why didn't he commit suicide when he was in the asylum? So in other words, the whole context around Ovesu was, you can't say that because things weren't going well for him or that he was experiencing hardship, that's why he committed suicide. He had experienced much worse hardship. The most, I think, vulnerable time he was to suicide was just after he'd lost his ear. And then he was kicked out of all, and then he went to the asylum. That was when he was most vulnerable. And then he lived for 2 years after that. So it really doesn't make any sense. But what I'm saying is, in this letter, you're getting his psychology where he's saying, sign me up for that life. It's not like misfortune befell him and he couldn't handle it, and so he committed suicide. He embraced that life. He accepted that life. He had been hardened into that whole lifestyle over a period of 5 years. If anything, things were going a lot better in the summer of 1890. He was actually having the time of his life in 1890. In fact, things were going so well, it's probably why he started getting his libido back and was looking at 21-year-old Marguerite Gachet. Anyway, that's the future. He says, after all, one is not in the world for one's own comfort. Look at those words. You're not in the world to be comfortable, and one does not need to be better off than one's neighbor. He's also not someone who's, what's the word, trying to keep up with the Joneses. He's also not someone who's jealous or envious or who covets. He's saying, I don't need to be better off than my neighbor. I don't need to be comfortable. I need to be an artist. I just need to be useful. And through his brother, he gets a sense, enough of a sense that what he's doing is adequate, not satisfactory, but certainly adequate, that he is getting somewhere. He says, being a little better off helps so little after all. Look at that. Being better off, having more money doesn't really help much, does it? Anyhow, so this is all Van Gogh pitching to his brother what he intends for the future. And he says, basically, I intend to be poor. Basically, I intend to not have a job, but I'm also not going to live like a king. Indirectly saying, Theo, I hope you're going to give me some pocket money. I hope you're going to be able to look after me. And we're going to hopefully get to deal with his inheritance from his father as well. Bridget says, that's a brilliant outlook. You take a lot of pressure off yourself if you say that, right? Blue sky day. Yeah, those are the coldest, right? Um, he did make himself vulnerable in the sense that he seemed like a downtrodden, disposable fellow, if that's what you mean. Okay, let's continue. We cannot prevent the days of our youth slipping from us, if that were possible. But the real thing that makes one happy, materially happy, being young and remaining so a long time, does not exist here. That doesn't even exist in Arabia or Italy, though it is better there than here. So, in a way, what he's talking about here is the substance of this channel. In a way, the conversation he's having right now with his brother through this letter is um, the theme, the mission statement of Team Peachtree. Not the idea of staying young forever, but the idea of how are you going to bear fruit? How are you going to be fruitful? How are you going to be happy? How are you going to flourish? How are you going to celebrate life? How are you? What do you intend for the future? And he says, but the real thing that makes one happy, materially happy, and he says that is being young and remaining so long time. And you think, what is the essence of being young? It is having energy. It's having vitality. It's growing. It's improving. It's becoming. Right. It's developing agency. And you might say, as an older person, if you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever, then that journey is over. It doesn't have to be. You can develop agency in another area. I wouldn't mind uh, going back to art and becoming, in my own little world, fairly good artist. I wouldn't mind doing that. Even if I didn't succeed, I wouldn't mind um, drawing the kind of pictures that I still have in my mind and still have in my heart. So you are never too old to be becoming someone or becoming something. Um, I must just tell you on a side note, right outside my window. So if you could see where I can see, if you could see out the window, I've got two peach trees that are growing. The one that is in the shade is now taller than the one that wasn't. But just a few meters further along, there was a very big peach tree, a beautiful peach tree that has been here as long as I've been here, that the chairman of this complex just willy-nilly just cut down. Its stem was probably this sort of size, so it was a mature peach tree producing peaches. And I think the people there said something about some of the branches of the tree were hanging over the washing line, and birds were sitting on the branches, and they were, pooing on the, so once again, the impact of poo. And so the person in charge of this area basically just said, well, I'll just cut down the whole tree. And I mean, I've literally got 2 peach trees growing right beside my washing line, and the idea is you just cut off the branches that overhang the washing line. And the same person who did this has got plastic grass in his garden. So you can see it's somebody who actually hates nature. It's someone who cannot tolerate nature, and it's someone who sees himself as far above nature. And as you can imagine, I have a bit of a problem with this person. I've told him in the past, when you want to do something like that, can you maybe just talk to somebody else? Because I think he has a bit of a God complex. I think he sort of feels like he's the king of the castle. And part of how he feels that is by, I think, cutting trees down. And people are more important than trees, he will tell you. Anyway. So, I mean, the bottom line is, how, in terms of this channel, also, how do you, what makes you happy? Does nature make you happy? Does health make you happy? Does fitness make you happy? Does traveling make you happy? And is happiness, like, how can I put it? Is it everyone's job for all 8 billion people in the world to be happy? You might say, buying things makes me happy. Cutting, so if you had 8 billion people like this guy mentioned, and all 8 billion people to get a kick out of cutting down trees. Imagine if 8 billion people cut down 8 billion trees just like that. But none of that makes me happy to do that. Oh, so you should do what makes you happy. Should people be allowed to do what makes them happy? And I suppose you could say yes, but I think the other side of it is, what is real happiness? Is happiness doing something that makes you happy, or doing something that makes you and someone else happy? Um, is happiness a solo journey, or is happiness something else? Helena says, being loved makes me happy. For some people, producing something makes them happy, contributing something makes them happy, being useful makes them happy. Yeah, so there are many interpretations. In a way, I kind of think of Van Gogh as a YouTuber who's trying to produce content. It's trying to show off what he can do, and then he just ends up never getting any subscribers. He puts in a lot of effort. Some of it is admittedly bad, and then ultimately, but what he's trying to do is show what he can do, show what he's feeling, express himself, but ultimately no one really cares. And is that because he doesn't care enough about the world? Is that because he's not interacting with the world? He's not responsive himself? I do think it's worth thinking about, how could Van Gogh have lived his life differently in a way that people could appreciate who he was? What if he just seemed a more respectable guy? In other words, if he had a little bit more of an image and a little bit more awareness of his of pandering, I guess, to his fellow man. If you want someone to buy your art, you've also got to maybe be more likable, less prickly, kind of thing. And in a way, I don't like that version of Van Gogh. It sort of seems like a smarmy fella, but in another way, that's the kind of guy he was to his brother. He was a little bit smarmy. He was like a lawyer trying to convince his brother to get him to do what he wanted. Imagine if you had a relative who kept asking you for money, and kept convincing you that he was going to make money and then never delivered. Meanwhile, you found out that he was drinking a lot and gambling, and he was trying to do what he's trying to do, but he was also gambling and so on. Wouldn't you be inclined to say, "You're a total loser. I'm not giving you another cent"? Meanwhile, although he was a drinker and although he was a gambler, he was also a damn good artist. So, in a way, we can be grateful that somebody did believe in Van Gogh because there were many reasons not to believe in him. PR skills, that's exactly it. That's you must maybe send me some of those. You must maybe send me some of those clips if you can find them, and I'll send them to this guy. Lorraine wants to get married. Have you been married before? Congeniality would have aided him. But I think what we like about Van Gogh is he has this incredible self-belief, and he is a almost like a Christ-like figure in that he takes the whole world on his shoulders and he says, I'm going to transcend that. And you know what? I just love art so much and I wish people could see what I'm seeing, and that's enough. There's something pure and good in that. I don't think it means the rest is okay, but there's something about living for your art that is very redeeming, I think. Okay. He says, I personally think that one has the greatest chance of remaining strong and renewing oneself under the present day tiers état. What does that mean? What's tiers état? I think it means third estate. So it does not belong to the clergy or the nobility. Um, I think it refers to the ancient regime. Anyway, if you can make sense out of this, maybe you can let me know. Um, yeah, Christ was congenial. That's true. Okay. Lorraine, I think, is talking about belonging. You can get a sense of happiness out of belonging to someone, belonging to something, being part of something, being connected to something or someone. Um, and in Van Gogh's case, he ends up belonging to his art, and his art belongs to him. So you can create something that you belong to as well. Okay. Well, so I say that I try to find it in painting without any thoughts on the side, but I shall do well to keep my eye on portrait painting if I want to earn something. I know it is difficult to satisfy people as to the likeness, and I dare not say beforehand that I feel sure of myself on that point. I don't know. I don't know if Van Gogh has ever been a terribly good portrait painter. Some of his self portraits aren't bad, but I think some of his most terrible art is are portraits, and I actually think his portrait of Dr. Gachet is one of his kind of boo-boos. I don't think it's terribly good. Ironically, it's the portrait of Dr. Gachet is his most one of the most valuable paintings ever painted. But I think that has a lot to do with Dr. Gachet himself. He says, I don't think it entirely impossible, for the people here are not much different from people elsewhere. Now the peasants here and the people from the village don't make mistakes, immediately say, contradicting me even when I say they are wrong. This is Renier de Greef, that is Toon de Groot, and that is Dien van den Beck, etc. And sometimes they even recognize a figure seen from behind. In the city, the honest middle class citizens, and certainly not less the prostitutes, attach great importance to portraits. You do have to wonder, in the middle of all of this, in the middle of his father having died and everything else, is Van Gogh still consorting with prostitutes? Because he was doing that pretty much constantly um, during this period of his life. I mean, after he turned his back on Christianity. Anyway, he says, and Malay discovered the sea captains even respect somebody who knows how to do them portraits. Probably these portraits are destined for their mistresses ashore. This has not yet been exploited. So can you see that's another reference to the era that he's living in? Ships and boats, not so much cars and planes. There are trains as well at this time, steam trains. But it's basically a world of ships and trains, not cars and planes. Anyway, he says, I've always remembered how Millet kept himself afloat in Le Havre in this way. I think he's talking about by painting portraits. Now, I certainly intend to go to Antwerp. So there he is really making it explicit. I'm planning to go to Belgium. It is impossible for me to tell how or when beforehand. I know I want to go to Belgium. I don't exactly know when. I found 6 art dealers' addresses, so I shall take some things with me. And further, as soon as I get there, I intend to paint a few city views, rather large size, and to exhibit them at once. Thus, concentrating everything on the work there and going there as a poor man, I've nothing to lose in any case, right? I'm going there as a poor man. I'm okay with being poor. And I mean, the big reason that they give Vincent for cutting off his ear and for committing suicide is firstly that his brother told him that his wife was pregnant. That's why he cut off his ear, because he's going to have no money. And then the other story was that his brother said that he was struggling and he might lose his job, so that's why he committed suicide. But he'd been poor all that time, and there was a money set aside through his inheritance. As to this region here, I know the country and the people too well and love them too much to be positively leaving them for good. Well, he would end up leaving them for good. I shall try to rent a room where I can put my things and shall be safe then in case I want to leave Antwerp for a time or if I get homesick for the country. When he says, I shall try to rent a room, I mean, that's basically Theo, I'm going to be renting a room. Can you send through the money? That's kind of what he's saying. That's good to hear. That's good to hear. He says, as to that job on the side, from the very beginning, Tearstick, for instance, had bothered me with it, and that was nonsense, whatever Tearstick may say. So can you see he's quite a opinionated dude. He doesn't mind arguing and being obstinate with those around him, including his own father. He says, those who talk most about it are unable to decide what it must be. Now, if you think about it, would it have been so bad if he just got a part-time job, maybe as a street sweeper or as a journalist? Would it have been that bad? Those who talk most about it are unable to decide what it must be. And as to that, to make my case quite clear, so making this big lawyerly argument why he shouldn't get a job. And in a way, maybe we can be grateful that he didn't because we benefit from the art that he produced, but he didn't. If I should take up a job on the side, the only thing would be that if I knew dealers or painters, I should try to do something with pictures. For instance, by going to England for them. Such things, of course, which are directly connected with painting are an exception, but otherwise, as a matter of principle, a painter must be only a painter. There it is. As a matter of principle, a painter must only be a painter. So you kind of get the sense, I don't know, when I'm reading this, you must almost imagine Van Gogh, because it's all handwritten. It doesn't have a typewriter, it doesn't have a word processor, it doesn't have a computer. Every word you're hearing is written, I think, in Dutch. It eventually is written in French, but it is handwritten. It's literally with a quill in ink, right? It's also not written with a pen. I think it's a quill in ink. Let's see if we can actually find this letter that he's writing right now. Um, 14 November. Am I going to be able to find it? This will just give you an idea of these letters in case you haven't seen them before, but this is actually what they look like. All handwritten. And then there's sometimes sketches like that. I just want to see if I can get his signature. There's his signature. So one must bear in mind, although you're looking at this type text, that's actually what it looks like. What's going on now? There it is. Okay, so let's go back to that. And so this is also just to address this idea that he was suicidal. I'm not a born melancholic. He says, don't forget that I'm not a born melancholic. The general nickname I have in this neighborhood is Schilder Manneke, the little painter fellow. I actually think it means painting maniac. Manneke, I don't know. I think that what that translates to is painting maniac. Let me see if I can confirm that. Schilder means paint. Manneke, does that really just mean man? Anyway, I can't seem to find it. But anyway, I think you'd agree with me that even if it doesn't mean maniac, it is that is what it was, a painting maniac. And he says, it is not without a certain dose of malice that I go abroad. That's also a very big statement. He's saying, I want to leave the Netherlands because I don't really like the contempt that I'm getting in my hometown. He's saying, I do actually have, I don't know if he means that he's experiencing malice or he's feeling malice. What do you guys think? It is not without a certain dose of malice that I go abroad. I think what he means is he's had enough of Nuenen, that he's had enough of the people around him. I think he's also wants to shake off in a way, the death of his father. He wants to shake off the shadow of family in a way, and he wants to be his own person. Now I have also thought of Drenthe, but it is more difficult to carry out. That, however, would be a good thing in case my painting of rural life might please in Antwerp. So he wants to go to a city and show them paintings of the countryside. That's really his strategy. Is there a book with Vincent's handwritten letters? There is. Let me see if I can get it for you. Just a second. Timmy, what are you doing? So I just quickly tweeted this video. I'm a little bit disappointed that doing this live on this channel, the subscribers didn't change whatsoever. It's still 318. That's definitely pretty disappointing. But anyway, to answer your question, Deborah, here's a book, Vincent van Gogh, A Life in Letters. What you really get is kind of plain text. So all of the letters are in here. But I mean, most of it is, you wouldn't be able to read them anyway, but you do get some paintings that are in that he's done. And then you've also got a couple of samples of letters. I think such as that, sketches that he made inside of letters. I'm just trying to see if I can find so if we go to where we are right now, if we go to, I'm not sure if every single letter is here. We go to exactly where we are right now in the story. So here's an article, sorry, here's a chapter, His Best Days. And then it refers to All. There's a picture, I think, of the yellow house in All. Right, so that's a very rare picture of the yellow house in All. Just go back a little way. So here's the chapter Antwerp. That's exactly where we are. Here is Emile Bernard. That's one of his friends. I think he meets him in Antwerp, right? And he is in Antwerp by the 28th of November, which is the subject of the next video. And so, yeah, you've got the chapter. So this book deals with the background to the letters, becoming a modern artist. So he basically, his journey to becoming who he is becoming is actually about to start now. So everything that has gone up to now is sort of his formative years and has provided the kindling. And from this moment on, when he leaves home and he spreads his wings, that's when he actually becomes who he is destined to become, right? So it is important that he takes this step. I just want to see if I can show you a letter here. I don't think they've got every single letter that he wrote. I think it's just the best ones. There's something else, some sketches from his letters. Can I show you a letter that's actually in here? I don't actually see actual letters in here. There's a section out of a letter. Anyway, so you might want to get this book, Van Gogh, A Life in Letters, edited by Ninka Bakker. But yeah, I'm sure if you Google this, you'll find it. So check that out. I actually might need to refer to that book every now and then going forward. So it's a good thing that I pulled it out. Thanks a lot, Sharon. Thanks very much. Iceland says, remember, it isn't subscriber count that matters. It is content and views. If you build it, they will come. So just to let you know, I'm wanting to use this channel later this year. And so I'm really hoping that it's I can monetize it by that time. Obviously, all of the content that's going on now is not monetized. So it's all done. I get nothing out of it, and I don't mind doing that. I don't mind being Van Gogh for a while, but if you think about it, each of these videos is like 3 hours or so long. You might say, I don't mind, spending 3 hours because this is essentially work. But when you get to whatever 30 hours, that's a bit much. That's quite a long time to be dedicating to something. But it's not really about the Van Gogh stuff. It's the content that follows that I would like to be able to monetize. In other words, when I'm traveling, I would like to be able to monetize that. So at 318 subs, that's quite a long way to go. I thought there might be a bit more interest in this, but maybe it does just require more effort. Maybe like Van Gogh, I must just do dozens of things and it'll just come on its own. Mel Stiller says, "Oh boy, I'm very late." Yeah, it's not the demographic of YouTube. No, you can't have the channel's not monetized yet. It's not quite there. You can't super chat this. No, not yet. Until it's reached that level, I think 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of watching. I can't quite remember what it is. Then you can't do that. So if you want to super chat, you can. If I do another live on the TCRS channel, and you can write down a super chat, almost like an IOU, and then you can put it in that live. But I mean, I'm going to be doing quite a few of these Van Gogh letters over the next couple of weeks. Anyway, so let's continue with this. The fact is I can do only one thing at a time, and that when I'm busy painting peasants, I cannot occupy myself with business in town. I kind of had the same attitude. There's a point where I was writing magazine articles and I was writing books, and I eventually reached a point where I said, I cannot do both. I can't do good work and serve both these masters. I've got to choose one. And I didn't mean it exclusively, like I will never write a magazine article again, but I kind of just felt like I need to focus on one thing. And I made a decision that I'm happy about, but 99% of people would say, you're crazy. And I said, I'm going to make a living writing books. And that's what I did, certainly for a while. Anyway, he says, now is just the moment to break free for a while. And he's 100% right with that. It is the moment to break free. As I've had trouble with my models, and in any case, I'm going to move. In this studio, just next door to the priest and the sexton, the trouble would never end, and this is clear. So I'm going to change this, but then it does not make an absolute impression on people. And by renting another room and taking no notice of it for months, the intrigue will lose most of its virulence. Now, wouldn't it be best if I could spend the next 2 months, December and January, in Antwerp? Now, if we want to jump to the chase, what's going to happen is telling his brother that he's going to Antwerp, which is in Belgium, which is between the Netherlands and France, right? In other words, he's moving closer to Paris by going to Belgium. What is going to ultimately happen is he's going to end up knocking on his brother's door in Paris. In other words, he's going to just pitch up in Paris because things aren't going to work out in Antwerp as well. And his brother's not going to be terribly happy with that. In other words, at the end of all of this, he's going to be like, hey, Theo, I'm here. Sorry, I didn't tell you I'm coming, but here I am. And so Theo's literally going to have to take him under his wing. That's where all of this is going. So at this point, he's telling Theo his plans, and of course, Theo's got to pay for it. He says, in Amsterdam, I stayed at a people's hostel for 50 cents. I would do the same there, or better still, I should like to make an arrangement with some painter to work in his studio. Another reason is that that is not absolutely improbable that I shall find an opportunity somewhere to paint from the nude. They would not want me at the academy, nor would I want to go there, but perhaps a sculptor, for instance, might be sympathetic. Of course, one can get as many models as one likes with money, but without it, it is a difficult problem. So that's the other side, is although Van Gogh is trying to paint, he's also trying to, what's the word? he's a 32-year-old. He's also trying to have a sexual life, and he wants his brother to give him money that he can pay for models, which he also ends up sleeping with. So that's the other side to Van Gogh. That's not necessarily the nice guy. It's just who he is, right? But that's also a way that he's a little bit manipulative. He says, but there will certainly be some people there who take models for the nude and with whom one might make an arrangement as to the expenses. I need it for many reasons. I received your letter while writing this. If necessary, Jeepers, it's a long letter. I'm willing to go to Dr. van der Loo. I think that's regarding their mother. However, you know that doctors do not always tell everything, particularly in doubtful cases. That's a veiled reference to their mother. Also, you should understand that slight clouding of her mind I told you about will presumably recur, a thing that many people are afflicted with as they get older. At any rate, I think it a practical idea not to let her be present at the bustle of moving unless she should insist on it. But anything that's quite heartless is he's actually anticipating his mother dying. He's actually anticipating his mother's decline. And at that same time, he's like, well, I'm out of here, right? For the rest, old fellow, I myself am convinced that van der Loo has advised mother everything, absolutely everything that could be advised, and would not say anything new. I mean, he would already have warned us if a danger threatened that might be averted. But if he said nothing, it might be a sign that if there is anything the matter with mother, he would not be able to do anything about it. He seems to be overthinking this, and that nothing ought to be done. If he leaves nature to her own devices, it's quite a heartless way of putting it. He does it because it is the best thing to do. Van der Loo is awfully precise and Zola-like, cool-headed and equable. Well, I think I shall speak about it sometime or other. Either I might go to him or mother might meet van der Loo when he's visiting the village. We shall try to do something, but I think things will have to take their course without our being able to do much. While in such cases, worrying or being exaggeratedly uneasy is unsupportable to the patient, if she is aware of it. I think you will admit this, and with old people, it is absolutely impossible to predict anything because often the heart is no longer normal, for instance, because of fatty degeneration, and then they may be gone all at once. Look at what he's thinking about. It's quite disgusting in a way. He's almost thinking about his mother in the past tense. He says, of course, emotions may have a great influence, and that is why there's a much better chance of keeping alive if the mind is no longer so very clear as in the periods of lucidity. It's quite strange. You've got Van Gogh talking about someone else dying and someone else's health and someone else's mental health and someone else's lucidity when people would later be having these conversations about him. In many cases, she used to be rather chary of speech. So I, for one, prefer to say that I don't know everything about her. Because of the very fact that her mind is now quite lucid, letting her do what she wants to do is certainly the easiest way. In the first place for herself, and secondly, is the most justifiable way for us. Silently understanding that to her it would mean anything but a misfortune if she should not have much longer to live and departed this life without much suffering. Serenity in this matter is reasonable, but serenity too, if there should prove to be many years yet of practically mechanical life. You see that I wanted to fix my going to Antwerp at about the same time as mother's trip, which will be over by February. Between then and their definite moving, I shall either be back in Nuenen, or if I were kept there for some reason or other, I should always be ready to come back at once if necessary. So he's saying, you should allow me to leave Nuenen. If something happens, I'll just come back. This letter must go, but in a few days I shall write you again about what I arrange with Will. I shall propose that she go with mother to van der Loo before the trip. So he wants his sister in the role of caregiver or caregiver. To mother, this is an entirely natural thing to do. After Van der Loo has seen her, it will be the moment for either Will or me to ask him outright whether he can tell anything about her life expectancy. If necessary, according to what you and Will think, I'm willing to go and prepare Van der Loo before Mother's visit and tell him what we should very much like to know, and ask him to give her an especially thorough checkup. Yeah, quite grim. Shall we go on to one more letter? What do you guys think? Deborah says, so sorry to have to leave this wonderful chat. 6:45 p.m. in Australia. Cheers. Cheers, cheers. Iceland, do you want to go to sleep as well? It must be about, what time is it in Hawaii? Maybe his mom had dementia. I don't think so. His mother was still in pretty good health when he died. Okay, so he has Lane with poplars. Well, we've seen this. That's not such a great picture of it, but so anyway, he says, Dear Theo, I will tell you what Dr. van der Lewis said about Mother in a few words. He says, there's nothing the matter with her, that she may live another 10 years or so, that she would have to contract some disease or other to die earlier. And finally, he seems to think it quite natural that at times she should be a bit dazed, but he did not attach much importance to it. So she can do whatever she likes and does not need to be very careful in the matter of making trips or moving. So much the better in any case. At any rate, it is reassuring. For speaking for myself, I believe what he says and taking into consideration the excellent care Will takes of Mother, Will actually, there's not much chance of her contracting a disease. I wanted to inform you of this promptly. It sets my mind at rest too. I must say I'm longing for Antwerp now. Probably the first thing I shall do there will be to go and see the pictures by Lays in his dining hall, if it is open to the public. You know that walk on the ramparts and those which Bracamond etched the table and the servant maid. I imagine it will be beautiful there this winter, especially the docks with snow. Of course, I shall take a few pictures with me, and they will be those that I would otherwise have sent to you one of these days. A big mill on the heath in the evening, and a view of the village behind a row of poplars with yellow leaves, still life, and a number of drawings of figures. At present, I'm rather in a fix with my work here. It is freezing hard, so working out of doors is impossible. It is better to take no models at all as long as I live in this house, at least until I come back. You kind of get the idea that he wants to leave so you can have models, right? Then I save my colors and canvas so as to have ammunition there. So the sooner I can go, the better. The other day I had a letter from Lures about my pictures. He wrote that Tierstig and Visseling had seen them but did not care for them. So is getting feedback that other artists and art dealers don't like what he's doing. All the same, I maintain that I shall bring people to have other ideas, although they may be indifferent. I've just read a few books in the style of the Souvenirs of Guigou, which my friend in Antwerp had ordered, and which I found very interesting things about the men of that period, beginning with Paul Huet, and which encouraged me to think that I've not attacked nature in the wrong way, nor the technique of painting, though I readily admit that I shall and must change a lot more. As to the heads which I sent you, there must be some good ones among them. I'm almost sure of it, so let's get on quietly. Wow, so it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning in California. Tomorrow says 20 to 4, sleepless in a dysfunctional city of America. Okay. I'm also taking along at least 40 small stretches of the size of those study heads which you have, and drawing material and paper, so that whatever happens, I shall always have something to do. As I've been working absolutely alone for years, I imagine that though I want to and can learn from others and even adopt some technical things, I shall always see with my own eyes and render things originally. However, it is quite certain that I shall try to learn some more, and if possible, especially the nude. She's been saying that quite a few times. I really want to paint nude, probably women. I really need to get models and really need nudes in my life, right? That's why I think he wants to leave. I am afraid I shall not succeed in getting good models, as many as I like, and good ones, but shall have to find the money for it by making other things, either landscapes or city views or portraits, as I said, or even signboards and decorations. Or what I did not mention in my previous letter among the jobs on the side, that would be possible by giving painting lessons. So that's something you could do, give painting lessons, letting them begin by painting still life, which I think is a different method from that of drawing of the drawing masters. I've tried it on those acquaintances of mine in Antwerp, and I should dare to repeat it. I shall certainly leave immediately as soon as I get the monthly allowance from you. I'm going to leave immediately as soon as you've given me money. I'm here. These are my plans. I'm going to Antwerp. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But you're going to pay for it all. So can you send me the money? Sharon, you are up late, 3:40 a.m. in Toronto. And if you should by chance be able to send it a week earlier, I would also start a week earlier. But of course, I do not count on this. I'm glad you're saying I'm not relying on you. I don't expect it from you. I'm just hopeful that you're going to help me out. I'm glad I've now been to see the Amsterdam Museum, for since then I've noticed that what I see there has been useful in my work. Write soon if you have time, as I'm busy packing my things. My thoughts are, of course, more there than here. I painted continuously here to learn painting, to get firm notions about color without having much room in my head for other things. But when I got off to Amsterdam for a few days, I enjoyed seeing pictures again immensely. For sometimes it is damned hard to stand completely outside the world of painters and pictures and to have no contact with others. So there is a very rare admission, a very rare confession that he does find it hard being alone. And obviously, when he goes to Paris, it's going to be completely different. He will be with his brother, who's an art dealer. He will mix with dozens of artists. He will meet Paul Gauguin. He will meet many other people. His whole social life will explode. And that whole thing of it being hard on the outside of the artistic world will fizzle away. So it's this reason he feels like an outcast, he feels locked out, he feels like a spectator, he feels misunderstood. He doesn't have people around him that are like him. And I guess the sexual urge, all of that is driving him out of the nest, and it is necessary that he does do that. Since then, I've felt the longing to go back to them, at least for a time, having been entirely out of it for a few years, and having wrestled with nature sometimes helps. And one may get a new store of courage and also of health by it, of which one can never have too much, for a painter's life is often hard enough. Once again, we've got reinforcement of this idea that he knows the life of an artist is hard. He doesn't wake up in December 1888. Oh, being a painter is hard. I'm going to cut off my ear. He's known it all along. He doesn't wake up in the summer of 1890 and realize, wow, a painter's life is hard. He knows it's hard, and he's a pretty hard fellow, um, hardened by struggle, hardened by difficulty, hardened by rejection, hardened by um, poverty. As to my work, I shall have to act according to circumstances. I mean, if I can get in touch with an art dealer, I must try and get him to show some things of mine. But all is not lost that is delayed, and especially if I may succeed in making new studies of heads or fingers, I will soon show you some of them. The one landscape I'm taking with me, and if possible both, but the one with the yellow leaves. So he is pretty impressed with this. And I personally think this is his best work. So that's what he's taking with him to Antwerp. The horizon is a dark streak against a light streak of sky. It's the second or third time he's describing it. In that dark streak, little patches of red, bluish, and green or brown. The sky higher up, grey with the black saplings and yellow leaves against it. The foreground all covered with yellow leaves, in which are two little black figures and a blue one. To the right, a birch trunk, white and black, and a green trunk with red-brown leaves. So, yeah, you have confirmation that their mother died in 1907, 17 years, almost 20 years after Vincent himself died. She actually lived to see Vincent's name growing kind of in the world, which is quite interesting. This was a sketch that enclosed with a letter of the poplars. Okay, I think that's going to be about it. I wanted to do two more letters, but they're so long. How long is this letter? So this is the letter from Antwerp. I actually wanted to end on this letter. I want to tell you that I am in Antwerp. I think we're going to end in the previous letter. So the last letter he wrote from Nuenen. Does that make sense? We're going to conclude this episode 35 with his very last letter from Nuenen, and from there he leaves the Netherlands and he goes to Paris, where he discovers color, and then from there he goes to the south of France, where he discovers even more color. Look at the painting that he's referencing here. Look, it's still the colors of excrement. It's still the colors of dirt and potatoes. Do you see that? He is yet to fully appreciate color. And although the poplars is a step in that direction, is nowhere near where it needs to be. Also, if you think about the colors in this picture and the colors of the Bible and the yellow book beside it, they're very, very similar. The palette that he draws from are very, very similar. The colors of slime and excrement. So anyway, it says, Dear Theo, very many thanks for the 50 francs. Does I say very many francs? Very many thanks for the 50 francs and your letter. You will be able to understand that I shall leave next Tuesday if you consider, firstly, that I'm simply longing for it, and secondly, that I risk getting stuck here with my work through a lack of models. Now, I really don't know whether he sends him the 50 francs to say, here's money to go to Antwerp. I don't really know if that's what's going on, because 50 francs seems not terribly a lot of money. But the point is, he asks his brother for money, he gets money, and now he's communicating that I'm now intending to leave next Tuesday. He says, as to my feeling the loss of a studio in Antwerp, yes, I certainly shall, but I must choose between a studio without work here. So he's saying, I've got a studio here, but no work, and work there, but without a studio. I choose the latter, and I did it so gladly that it seems to me like a return from exile. So he's saying going to Antwerp, leaving Nuenen and leaving his hometown in a way, leaving his family. He says it's like returning from exile. For I've been altogether out of the painter's world for a long time. He's trying to return to the world, the life of a painter. And it's almost like his family has held him back from that. The slander and the sort of what the church folk in his hometown have said about him, and all of that is provide a kind of a leash that he doesn't like being on, and he wants to be the artist unleashed, right? He says, meanwhile, my power is somewhat ripened. Interesting turn of phrase. So that I feel more independent of the common intrigues, which enables me to pitch certain fellows out. I mean that in The Hague, I was somewhat weaker with my brush than the rest. I don't say in my drawing, as they asked only for painting and color was more easily crushed than will prove possible now. As for Rubens, I'm looking forward to him very much. But do you object to my thinking Rubens's conception and sentiment of his religious subjects theatrical, often even badly theatrical in the worst sense of the word? Look here, take Rembrandt, Michelangelo, take the Penseroso by Michelangelo. It represents a thinker, does it not? So he's referring to this. This is the Penseroso. Penseroso. He says it represents a thinker, doesn't it? You can see that it does represent a thinker. Can you see that? Okay. But his feet are small and swift, are they? Yeah, they are pretty small. Okay. His hand is something of the lightning quickness of a lion's claw, does it? Interesting. And that thinker is at the same time a man of action. One sees that his thinking is a concentration, but in order to jump up and act in some way or another. So it's quite interesting that he compares himself to this thinker, someone who's been thinking, and is about to spring into action. He kind of identifies his situation, his circumstances right then with this artwork. Quite interesting. That's someone who knows his art. Anyway, he says Rembrandt does it differently, especially his Christ in the Men of Emmaus. Is more a soul in a body, which is surely different from a torso by Michelangelo, but still there's something powerful in the gesture of persuasion. So that's this reference to this picture. Gesture of persuasion. He's also someone who's thinking that it's about to do something, I guess. Now put a Rubens beside it, one of the many figures of meditative persons, and they become people who have retired into a corner in order to further their digestion. That's how it is in everything, religious or philosophical, he does. It is flat and hollow, but what he can paint is woman, like Boucher and Beda. There especially gives one it gives one most to think about, and there he is at his deepest. What he can do, combinations of colors, what he can do is paint a queen, a statesman, well analyzed, just as they are. But the supernatural, where magic begins, no, unless painting something infinite into a woman's expression, which, however, is not dramatic. I found a passage about Gainsborough, which again stimulates me to work with one stroke. Look here. It is this brusqueness of touch that produces so much effect. The spontaneity of his impression is all there and communicates itself to the spectator. For the rest, Gainsborough had a perfect method of ensuring the completeness of his composition. He planned his picture all at once, and he carried it out harmoniously from top to bottom, without concentrating his attention on separate little fragments, without obstinately working over details. You can see how ensconced he is in his art. He's very much, you could say, caught up in it. Some people might say he's obsessed. He's very driven. He's on a mission in terms of his art. He's basically eat, sleeping, and drinking art. His letters are just dripping with artistic ideas and thoughts. There's very little mention of family, of daily experiences. It's just color, art, this and that, and the next thing. He says he planned his picture all at once and he carried it out harmoniously from top to bottom without concentrating his attention on separate little fragments, without obstinately worrying over details, for he sought the general effect, and he nearly always found it. He's thinking about this idea of a general effect. What's the color that you want to convey? What's the tone that you want to convey? What's the basic thing you want to convey? Forget about the details. So in a way, he's looking beyond the reality. In the same way, that picture of my aunt of the duck, it transcends the reality of the pond and says, look at the duck. That's the thing you must pay attention to. I don't know if you know, the way the eye works, when you look at something, it's almost like you only see a small little area that's in focus. But because of how the brain works, if you look from one point to another point, well, when you look at that other point, that point is in focus. When you look back to the original point, that point is in focus. Actually, everything around it isn't in focus, but your brain leads you to believe that it is, even though it's not. So that's an interesting point, Bridget. Iceland says, I literally have my hand out on my chin, thinking as listening and reading. Okay. Okay, so what else does he say? I shall send you the book by Blanc from Antwerp as soon as I can add a few studies. And now we're coming to the very last letter from Nuenen, the end of the very last letter from Nuenen. As I don't know where I shall stay, I'll ask that when you write on December 1, address your letter to the General Post Office, unless I let you know otherwise. For I shall write again one of these days. I found the enclosed sonnet by Jules Breton in a magazine. That's also a fairly modern thing. Magazines in the late 19th century was fairly modern. Bear in mind the printing press was, although established, it was taking a while to transition from Bibles and newspapers to everything else. Just taking a while Bibles, books, eventually newspapers, and then other things, pamphlets, prints of art, and also magazines. So magazine was a pretty modern addition to what is going on in the late 19th century. Let me just have a look, see if I can find when were magazines invented. I don't know if invented is the word, but yeah. First magazine ever made was, well, quite early, 1668. When did magazines become popular? 1890. So magazines were really becoming mass circulation in after 1900. Did you know that? This is one of the first magazines. I know that's 2009. Okay, so here's the front cover of the Illustrated London News. So although sounds like it's a newspaper, it's actually a magazine. And that's what it looked like. The Illustrated London News. Life magazine, 1924. Magazine stand in 1941. 1928. And you also went from magazines to comics. I think comics came about in 1938. And look at what magazines, I mean, look at what they are today and how they started out, right? That's magazines sort of today, in a sense. So that's also something he was doing, reading magazines. He says, I repeat, as to my rather sudden departure from here, if I hadn't had trouble with the models, I should have spent the winter here. But working steadily with models here is not so much hampered by the priest's opposition, which in itself would have been neutralized by my ignoring it completely. But the worst is that though I found the courage to stand my ground, people hesitate and are more frightened than I thought they would be. So it's quite interesting that he's talking about standing his ground. You almost get the idea that he first learned to do that with his father. You kind of get the idea that he was quite a meek and mild kid and young adult. And it's taken him until the age of 30, early 30s, 32 years old, to stand his ground almost in a, what's his name? Brian Koberg is 28 years old. Can he stand his ground? Does he know how to? Well, yeah, you've got Van Gogh, 4 years older, that's just learning how to stand his ground. But he's saying people around him are hesitating and they're frightened. Um, I wonder what he means by frightened. I think they're worried about his reputation as a bit of a lech, right? He says, I'm not going to undertake it unless I'm quite sure that they have the courage. I think he means I'm not going to undertake painting portraits. Now it might help if I go away for a couple of months, and if it doesn't help, then not one of those to whom I gave something for it every week last winter will earn a penny with it this winter. Can you see there is a bit of malice, a bit of resentment, a bit of a bad aftertaste to his life in Nuenen? It's like it does feel like he's used up his credit in Nuenen. It does look like he's used up whatever currency, whatever social currency he had, certainly with his father around, has kind of been lost. Does that make sense? So we're not going to take it further than that. We'll continue in episode 36 with his journey to Antwerp and what happens there. Things don't really last there terribly long. I think he's out of Antwerp within a month or two. So from here on, it actually starts getting quite exciting. There's movement in his life. He's just come out of the longest period of time he spent in any one place in his entire life. The time he spent in Nuenen was the longest that Van Gogh remained in one place in his entire life. And now his life journey gains a certain amount of traction. So that's definitely going to be quite interesting. I'm very interested in dealing with his life in Paris because I know the Arles part really well, and I know the Auvers part very well. I don't know the Paris part that well, and although I'm somewhat familiar with the Saint-Remy um, episode, I don't know it as well as I'd like to. So we're going to start moving in that direction. The unfortunate thing about when he's in Paris is, well, when he's in Paris, he's living with his brother, so there's no need to write any letters. Ironic, isn't it? At the moment that his life is starting to transform, while he's now living in Paris, he doesn't really need to write his brother any letters. So the letters that we see from this period are somewhat spread out and thin. It might be letters to his sisters. It might be letters to other friends, but it's not really letters to Theo anymore. And so at this critical time, his letters do kind of thin out. Let's see if I can just quickly show you what I mean. So if we go to the chronology of letters, we are now going into 1886. We've just dealt with November. That's November 1885. That's there, right? And then you can see there's a couple of letters after that. And then look how it sort of runs out. One letter, two. There's a whole month that goes by with no letters. Another whole month that goes by, no letters. Another one letter. So this is almost a lost year. 1886 is almost a lost year. There's not no letters, but there are very few letters. And we'll obviously deal with all of them. Okay, so let's have a look at some of your comments. It was unique. Google says Van Gogh references jewels over 100 times. I wouldn't be surprised. I was thinking about Koberger earlier when Vincent was dehumanizing his mother. Didn't Vincent say he enclosed a sonnet by Jules Breton? Did he say that? Oh, I enclosed a sonnet. Yeah, I enclosed a sonnet by Jules Breton in a magazine. You're right. He did say that. Bridget says, a month without letters from Vincent. What a shame at that particular point. Definitely. The good news is that once he only spends 1886 and 1887. He spends 2 years in Paris, obviously with his brother. So we kind of lose a lot of um, that period in terms of correspondence. We kind of lose 2 years, not like completely, but we don't have the same continuity. And then as soon as he goes to All, which is at the beginning of 1888, then you've got a shitload of letters. Literally, I don't think he writes more letters than when he's in All. It's like, I think sometimes it's 20 letters a month kind of thing. So if anything, he makes up for the lack of letters when he's in All. So that's something. It is a lost art. F. Scott Fitzgerald lived in Paris for quite some time. Writers lost and found themselves in Paris. Yeah. I've also been to Paris quite a few times. I was in Paris in 2019. Okay, so that is it from me. I just want to thank you guys for being here for all of over 3 hours. I think you'll agree with me that this was once again a very interesting peek into the final moments of his long hiatus in Nuenen, and now things are really going to get cracking. His art's going to change. He's going to change, and I also think the whole syphilis thing is going to, unfortunately, at the same time that he's going to find life, I think death is going to start taking hold of him as well. That's unfortunately the way life often is. In the pursuit of your fairy tale, well, a monster, a dragon also emerges. Thanks a lot, Sharon. Thanks, guys. Thanks for being here. I just want to again remind you that this channel is about the positive, optimistic thing. So we're not dealing with Van Gogh as a downer. We're dealing with his enthusiasm, his passion, his creativity, his optimism. That's what I want you to share in. His ability to see the color despite the circumstances he finds himself in. The fact that he inspires himself regardless of, well, can I sell a painting or not? And I think that does mean something. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Sharon. Iceland, thanks a lot for being here. I think Terry's already gone to sleep. If you're watching this on replay, Stephanie or anybody else, if you found this worthwhile, please make the effort. Maybe you don't normally. Please make the effort to try and share this on some other social media, whether it's Facebook platforms dedicated to Van Gogh or to art or to how to paint or whatever. By the way, I think I need to change the title I've got there. I don't know why it's saying TCRS, but can't seem to change it either. Anyway, I'll do that the next time. Hopefully I'll remember. Okay, guys, hope those of you struggling with insomnia, if you turn my video down so you can barely hear it, then maybe you can use it as ASMR. If you're starting your day, I hope you have a great day. If you're going to sleep, sleep well. I definitely had strange dreams. I hope you have better dreams than I had. Guys, take care. Mel, all the peaches, guys, keep weaving. I did want to show you the photos I've taken recently of the weaver bird and the nest, but I'll do that in the next episode. So look out for that. Thanks, guys. All the best. Sweet dreams.